Hello, this section is entitled Initializing Data Systems with Products, the Cloud SQL version, and then this is part 3. So the last mechanism that Google provides for us to connect securely to a SQL instance is something called Cloud SQL Auth Proxy. It's a Google developed solution, so this is very specific to Google. And essentially how it works is you will install onto your machine, right, that wants to connect to the, like your client machine that wants to connect to the server. You install a piece of software, a client piece of software. And what that software does, it basically takes connections from your SQL client locally, right, and then tunnels that traffic securely to the server, which is also running kind of another half of this Cloud SQL proxy software. And that essentially allows you to securely communicate to your SQL server from the client to the server without the traffic having to be like without using the normal mechanism of having to secure, like create your own SSL certs and such on the server. Okay, and this is this is a very popular solution that Google will push seemingly in every opportunity. So it's obviously it's a fairly well tested solution. And what we'll do here now is we're going to talk about each of the various compute solutions, right? And we're going to look at how we can connect to it using any number of solutions that we've seen previously. So we're not going to do any live coding or it's going to be just basically walking through all the compute engine environments or all the compute solutions and see how we can connect. So a Google Compute Engine, that's the GCE instance that we spun up, right? So if you're going to run your database as public IP, we can do what we did before. This is what we actually did. We used a GCE public static IP for our, we need to make a static IP address for the client. Then we authorize that network, meaning that specific IP address. And then we use SSL TLS end to end, and that provides us a secure solution. Of course, the downside is you got the static IP that you got to manage now, and you also have to manage the SSL, the certs. Or you could just use Cloud SQL Auth Proxy, so you don't have to do near as much with it because you just use it and it tunnels the traffic for you. The nice thing, if you're using private IP addresses for your server, then you just directly connect using a direct IP connection. So I'm sorry, if you have private IP on the SQL server, then you can just use a direct IP connection. Okay, so for Kubernetes, again, if you're using a public IP address, right, then what you can do is you could actually use what's called a sidecar, and they provide solutions, examples of it for you, where it basically acts essentially as that SQL auth proxy that you can talk to. So that's basically very similar to how you would do the compute engine. And if it's private IP, then you can directly talk to the private IP that the SQL server is providing. For App Engine standard, for public IP, they provide a solution that uses Cloud SQL. The SQL Connect, right? So and you basically just connect to this certain path. They give you an example of it. So it's kind of built into it. And then for private IP, the tricky thing here is to do private IP, you need to make your, in this case, App Engine, right? You need to basically have it running in a private IP space. And there's something called a serverless VPC access connector. Again, I don't want to get down that rabbit hole, but you can essentially move your App Engine to be running in a private IP, and then you just connect directly. Under flexible, again, public IP is the same deal. You basically update your YAML file, but it's going to provide you access to your databases. And then for private IP, again, the nice thing here is you have to basically run your your service in a private IP space. But apparently there's a way of doing this that's a little bit simpler. You don't have to, you basically pick a subnet that you want to run in, and it just runs in that subnet, as opposed to having to do the full-blown serverless VPC access connector that you have to do for App Engine Standard. Okay. Cloud Run, so for the public IP again, they do the same thing. They provide you this Cloud SQL auth proxy, kind of already wired in. And then private IP, you have to use the serverless access connector. And then Cloud Functions is the exact same thing. So it seems like the broad pattern here is, and many of your serverless solutions, they provide you a way of using this auth proxy kind of out of the box. You don't have to do anything special. And then allows you to connect to the database. The alternative is you have to basically move that serverless functionality, whatever is running, into in one of your IP spaces, and they have various mechanisms of doing that. The big one being this for serverless VPC access connector. Okay, so this was sort of just a lot of words, but everything we talked about was also written in this the backing document, so you can read that or link to more detail as necessary. Thank you.